Summer 1940. RAF Hornchurch Airfield, Essex. Morning haze clings to the English grass as ground crews wheel two identical Supermarine Spitfires onto the apron. Each carries the same Merlin engine, the same 8 guns, the same camouflage paint dulled by salt air from the Channel. Yet within minutes, one of them will climb through the sky like nothing Britain has ever seen. Squadron leader Desmond Cook tightens his harness, glances once at the pale sun, and throttles forward. The first Spitfire surges down the strip, its wheels lifting after 300 yards. The climb is steady but slow, 11 minutes, 8 seconds to reach 20,000 feet, the ceiling where breath shortens and engines gasp. Cook circles once above the airfield, then glides back to Earth. On the ground, engineers wipe sweat and oil from their foreheads as a second Spitfire rolls into position. It looks identical, same markings, same weight, but the nose hides something new. 3 glinting blades of aluminum, each curved at a secret angle. Cook opens the throttle again. The aircraft leaps forward as if tugged by an invisible hand. Takeoff distance, 225 yards. At 7 minutes and 42 seconds, the altimeter needles 20,000 feet. The climb continues, 25,000, 30, 39,000 feet before the thin air surrenders. From the tarmac below, the men stare upward. Same plane, same power, same pilot, yet this one has rewritten physics. No one there knows the name Frank Caldwell, but his invention is already altering the war that will decide Britain's fate. Direct hit if you're watching this right now. Drop your location in the comments. I want to know how far this story has traveled. And don't forget to subscribe for more forgotten war breakthroughs that changed history. 8 years earlier, long before battle clouds gathered over Europe, a gray February morning hung low over East Hartford, Connecticut. Inside the test bay of the Hamilton Standard Propeller Corporation, machinery growled like caged thunder. Frank Walker Caldwell, age 43, adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and checked the gauges mounted beside a spinning shaft of polished steel. The engineer's world was oil, mist, mathematics, and vibration. Before him, a metal propeller blurred into a silver disc. 3 blades of aluminum twisted through the air at 2,400 revolutions per minute, yet their secret lay in motion unseen. Each blade could shift its angle while spinning, changing pitch automatically, finding the perfect bite of air without a pilot's hand. Across America's aviation halls, the idea was a punchline. Variable pitch propellers, the experts said, were nonsense. Too heavy, too complex, a mechanic's nightmare. Oil would freeze at altitude. Gears would seize. The Army Air Corps had stamped the design mechanically unsound. Even Charles Lindbergh had frowned and advised caution. But Caldwell was an engineer who trusted numbers more than applause. From the clipboard under his calloused fingers, equations told a different story. If the blades could adjust their angle like a gearbox in flight, an aircraft could climb 40% faster, fly farther on the same fuel, and survive an engine failure by feathering the blades with the wind instead of against it. That February, a phone call from Seattle changed everything. Boeing's new twin-engine Model 247, the pride of American airliners, had stalled in the thin air above Denver. 2 wooden, fixed-pitch propellers left it gasping at 5,000 feet. If the problem wasn't solved, Pan Am would cancel its orders, and the project would collapse. Caldwell saw his chance. 3 days later, a test aircraft lifted from the same Denver runway, carrying Hamilton Standard's experimental propeller. As the mountains rose ahead, the gauges held steady. 6,000 feet, 810. The airplane crossed the Continental Divide with power to spare. When it landed, the telegram raced east. Constant speed propeller exceeds all performance claims. Recommend immediate adoption. Within weeks, airline presidents who had dismissed Caldwell's idea were phoning East Hartford. Within months, every major U.S. carrier ordered his impossible propeller. Yet while the ink dried, new shadows crept across the world map, Germany arming, Japan expanding, and air power becoming the weapon of destiny. In May 1933, the Navy's Bureau of Aeronautics called. They wanted fighters that could outclimb anything Germany or Japan could build. Caldwell's variable pitch design, once dismissed as a civilian novelty, was suddenly a matter of national defense. He worked night and day in the test sheds, creating the hydromatic propeller, a device that married engine oil to mechanical genius. As engine speed rose, oil pressure pushed a piston that twisted each blade's root, finding the perfect angle for any phase of flight. A small centrifugal governor, no bigger than a coffee tin, kept the propeller spinning at constant RPM regardless of air density or altitude. It was elegance born of stubborn logic. But acceptance came slowly. Army test pilots scoffed. They imagined hydraulic failures over enemy territory, frozen oil, jammed gears. Caldwell replied with proof. He built the World Test, a roaring stand that punished propellers harder than any aircraft ever could. Blades endured loads 50% beyond design limits. Governors spun for 500 hours in heat and cold that mimicked desert and Arctic skies. Data replaced doubt, one decimal at a time. Yet even as the figures stacked in his favor, rival companies fought back. Curtiss-Wright engineers labeled his creation an unnecessary complication. Technical papers circulated claiming constant speed systems would kill pilots when oil thickened at 35,000 feet. Caldwell responded with another test, and another. At -60 degrees Fahrenheit, his propeller performed better, not worse. The thicker oil delivered steadier pressure, tighter control. The first military demonstration came in March 1934 at Selfridge Field, Michigan. Two identical P-26 fighters roared into the air, one with a fixed-pitch propeller, one with Caldwell's constant speed system. The crowd of officers watched the stopwatches. At 10,000 feet, the old design gasped after 8 minutes 30 seconds. The new one reached altitude in 5 minutes 40. Speed increased 16 miles per hour. Service ceiling jumped 6,000 feet. Lieutenant Colonel Carl Spaatz wrote the report himself. Any air force equipped with constant speed propellers will possess decisive superiority. Caldwell's victory should have brought peace of mind, but outside the hangar doors, the world was changing faster than his test stands could spin. In Europe, German engineers tuned the Messerschmitt Bf 109 with manually adjustable blades. In Britain, Spitfires rolled from factories carrying crude two-position propellers that demanded constant pilot attention. They worked barely. Above 15,000 feet, performance collapsed. By 1939, the engineer in Connecticut had built a machine ready for war, and the pilots in England were about to discover they could not survive without it. By 1938, Europe's horizon darkened under banners no engineer could ignore. In the skies above Germany, Messerschmitt fighters clawed their way higher, faster, deadlier. Across the Channel, the Royal Air Force struggled with machinery still trapped in yesterday's technology. Two-position propellers forced pilots to choose between power and speed, climb and cruise, never both. It was like sending athletes into battle with one shoe. Frank Caldwell's invention, first tested for comfort, now whispered of survival. When reports from British test pilots reached Washington, the message was blunt. If war came, air superiority would belong to the nation that mastered constant speed flight. In a Connecticut office littered with blueprints and test logs, Caldwell's pencil traced the shape of the future. A governor the size of a man's fist that could control an aircraft's lifeblood. The hydromatic propeller was no longer theory. It was a breathing system of pistons, valves, and gears that gave aircraft minds of their own. It adjusted, reacted, and protected without a single pilot's command. When war finally erupted in September 1939, the Royal Air Force found itself outclimbed and outpaced. In mock combat over France, Spitfires tried to chase German Bf 109s through rising air, only to stall while their opponents vanished into sun-bleached heights. Pilots cursed their propellers more than their enemies. That winter, Caldwell's data landed on British desks again. His numbers were impossible to ignore. A 40% improvement in climb rate, 7,000 feet higher ceiling, 15% greater range. Still, bureaucracy moved slower than flight. Factories debated contracts while airfields prepared for invasion. Then came one man who refused to wait. Squadron leader Desmond Cook of No. 65 Squadron had seen enough of war to know mathematics could save lives faster than metals. In June 1940, he made the call himself, directly to de Havilland Propellers, the British licensee of Hamilton Standard. His request was urgent. Convert every Spitfire his squadron owned to the American system. Now. Technicians worked through nights thick with anxiety. Old hubs were stripped, hydraulic lines fitted, governors calibrated. 8 hours per aircraft, 12 aircraft in rotation. The work smelled of oil, sweat, and quiet defiance. On June 15th, the first converted fighter rolled from the hangar at Hatfield. Cook climbed into the cockpit, aware that every eye on the airfield followed his hands. Throttle forward. The Spitfire leapt ahead, tail lifting almost instantly. 225 yards, airborne. Then the climb began. 5,000 feet. 10. 15. The propeller shifted pitch seamlessly, keeping the Merlin engine singing at perfect RPM. 20,000 feet in 7 minutes, 42 seconds. Cook laughed into the oxygen mask as the altimeter passed 39,000. The aircraft still felt hungry for more sky. When he landed, his report to Fighter Command was immediate and furious in its simplicity. The Spitfire is now an airplane. Request immediate conversion of entire squadron. Within 72 hours, every operational Spitfire in No. 65 Squadron carried constant-speed propellers. The pilots returned to the air with disbelief. Planes that once strained and groaned now climbed like unleashed predators. Flight Lieutenant Brian Lane wrote in his diary that night, "It feels as though someone doubled the horsepower." While the warfront burned, engineers at East Hartford watched telegrams pour in. Production ramped until the factory floor pulsed with the rhythm of war. The clang of aluminum, the hiss of oil, the endless spin of test rigs. The hydromatic system that had once occupied a single workshop now commanded an army of machinists. By late summer, the results reached the front lines. Combat patrols reported 2-minute faster climbs to interception altitude. Fighters could linger over the channel longer, their fuel stretching as efficiency rose. More important than numbers was morale. For the first time, British pilots could choose when to fight and when to vanish into higher clouds. Caldwell followed every report with methodical pride. His notebooks, filled with tables and graphs, now read like survival ledgers. Each line of data represented aircraft that came home instead of disappearing into smoke. He worked 18-hour days without fanfare. Reliability obsessed him. Every valve, every seal faced torture beyond specification. 500-hour endurance runs, oil frozen to sludge then reheated to boiling, vibration tables mimicking combat dives. He knew that trust wasn't earned by theory, it was forged in fatigue. Back in Europe, the transformation spread like rumor through the RAF. De Havilland crews moved from airfield to airfield, replacing obsolete propellers before the next German raid. Within 3 months, 90% of Fighter Command flew with the constant speed design. When the first phase of the Battle of Britain erupted in July, the difference was instant. Spitfires reached bomber altitude minutes sooner, turning intercepts that used to fail into triumphs. Hurricanes once slow to climb now met enemy formations head-on. German pilots, trained to dive away when outclimbed, found British fighters above them instead of below. Radar warning stations bought precious minutes. Caldwell's propellers turned them into victories. For the men in the cockpits, the technology's beauty was its silence. No levers to adjust, no calculations mid-fight, just smooth, automatic power that let them focus on survival. In that summer sky of 1940, 3 spinning blades quietly carried the weight of an empire. By autumn, the engineer who once battled ridicule was winning a different war from across the ocean. The same mathematics that had guided airliners over the Rockies were now guiding nations through fire. When the Luftwaffe retreated from British skies, no newspaper printed his name. But in every squadron logbook, the data told his story. Shorter takeoffs, higher ceilings, longer range, the invisible victories of a man who refused to quit. When the clouds of Britain finally cleared, the same miracle of engineering that had saved the island was crossing the Atlantic. In the factories of Connecticut, Ohio, and Michigan, furnaces burned through the night, pouring aluminum into molds that would soon hum above the Atlantic and Pacific skies. The Hamilton Standard plant that once housed 800 workers now held 22,000, every one of them bound to a single rhythm, the spin of the propeller. Every bomber, every fighter, every patrol craft needed Caldwell's design to survive. The P-51 Mustang, P-47 Thunderbolt, B-17 Flying Fortress, and B-24 Liberator were all born from the same blueprint that had begun as pencil lines in a quiet engineer's notebook. The numbers were staggering. 500,000 assemblies ordered, 12,000 completed every month. Industrial America had turned a single man's stubborn dream into the pulse of a global arsenal. But victory demanded speed, not perfection. As production exploded, cracks began to appear where precision had once ruled. Untrained hands rushed assembly lines. Oils grew contaminated. Tolerances slipped by thousandths of an inch. At 30,000 feet, even the smallest error could kill. On an autumn morning in 1943, that truth struck with merciless force. AB-17 nicknamed Hell's Angels limped home from Schweinfurt, one engine feathered, another dying. Somewhere inside the hydraulic governor, a crystal of frozen oil jammed the valve that held the dead propeller still. It twisted back into the wind, dragging the aircraft into a fatal dive. 9 men vanished in smoke over a Bavarian forest. When the report reached East Hartford, Caldwell didn't delegate the investigation. He boarded a transport to England, walking through the cold hangars of East Anglia with the weary crews who trusted his invention. They told him the truth only soldiers can give. That machinery didn't care about bravery, and failure in the sky was unforgiving. Caldwell returned home carrying the weight of every lost crewman. He redesigned the governor from the ground up. Redundant circuits, double seals, backup mechanical stops. If one system failed, another would take over. He ordered new tests harsher than war itself. Oil chilled to 60 below, metal beaten by vibration until bolts screamed, propellers bathed in grit and acid to mimic neglect. What emerged was a device so reliable it shamed its critics into silence. By 1944, the propeller's failure rate in combat was less than 1%, lower than landing gear or electrical systems. Crews began calling it the Guardian. When engines failed over Germany, feathered blades saved entire bomb groups. Reports filled command logs. Crippled aircraft returning on 2 engines, crews alive because their propellers refused to die. In the Pacific, the transformation was even more dramatic. P-47 Thunderbolts, once mocked for their weight, now climbed like predators through tropical storms, their constant speed systems wringing power from each altitude. Japanese pilots flying Zeros with manual pitch controls struggled to keep pace. While they wrestled levers, American fighters simply adapted, shifting blade angle in fractions of a second. General Carl Tui Spatz wrote in his 1945 report to the Pentagon, "The constant speed propeller has given our aircraft decisive superiority." It ranks with radar as a war-winning invention. No monument bore Caldwell's name, yet his creation had saved an estimated 15,000 aircraft and countless lives. The statistics told only part of the story. The rest lived in the quiet testimonies of airmen who returned from the sky because the machine between them and oblivion worked exactly as promised. One winter night in 1945, in a hangar dim with fatigue and victory, a maintenance sergeant found Caldwell standing beside a dismantled propeller. The war was ending. Production lines were falling silent. The engineer's hands traced the gears like old friends. "It was never impossible," he said softly. "Just misunderstood." The hydromatic propeller became the standard of flight for decades, the unseen hero of every takeoff, every steady climb, every safe landing. And though the jets that followed would render its blades obsolete, its legacy remained in the principle it proved, that courage and precision, united by persistence, can outfly doubt. In the story of the Second World War, some victories roared across oceans. Others turned quietly, 3 blades at a time, high above the clouds. Frank Caldwell's impossible propeller was more than an invention. It was proof that a single mind armed with numbers and conviction can tilt the balance of history. From East Hartford to Hornchurch, from Denver's thin air to the skies over Berlin, his design stitched together a path of survival. It carried fighters higher, bombers farther, and nations closer to freedom. As peace returned and the world began to rebuild, Caldwell refused awards and publicity. He returned to his notebooks, teaching the next generation of engineers that innovation is not born of certainty, but of questions others are too afraid to ask. And somewhere, on a forgotten test stand where oil once sprayed and pistons screamed, his 3 spinning blades still echo the heartbeat of a time when science met courage, and the sky itself yielded. When the war's dust began to settle over Europe, the silent rhythm of Frank Caldwell's creation continued turning above every horizon. Each rotation of those blades carried not only thrust and torque, but a human story, of sleepless engineers, grease-stained machinists, and pilots who owed their lives to 3 pieces of polished aluminum spinning faster than the human eye could follow. The American war machine had become an orchestra, and Caldwell's hydromatic propeller was its conductor. At dawn, furnaces glowed orange in Connecticut, Michigan, and California. By nightfall, railcars rumbled toward the coasts, loaded with crates stamped Hamilton Standard Propeller for U.S. Army Air Forces. Inside, wrapped in waxed paper and coated with preservative oil, waited the difference between returning home and never being found. Across the Atlantic, airfields buzzed with aircraft that embodied the invention's promise. The B-17 Flying Fortress could now carry heavier bomb loads, climb out of flak zones, and limp back across the channel on half its engines. Crews nicknamed the system the Faithful Three, because even when one propeller jammed or leaked, the others adjusted automatically to balance thrust and keep the aircraft level. The P-47 Thunderbolt, a brute of steel and horsepower, finally found grace. It could dive, recover, and climb again without tearing itself apart. The P-51 Mustang became the legend of the skies, escorting bombers all the way to Berlin and back, something no Allied fighter had ever done before Caldwell's design made such range possible. Behind those victories stood the relentless grind of manufacturing. Women filled the assembly lines, Rosie the riveters in overalls measuring, grinding, and assembling precision parts with microscopic tolerance. Caldwell insisted every worker understand the purpose behind the task. "Each blade is a life," he said during one factory visit. "Build it as if your own son will fly behind it." His words spread through the plants like scripture. By 1944, quality defects had dropped by half. The hydromatic propeller was not merely a mechanism. It was a system that taught war industries how to think in feedback loops. Sensors, governors, automatic correction. These principles would later guide engineers into the jet age and beyond. Caldwell himself foresaw it. In lectures to Army engineers, he warned that aviation's next frontier would not be brute power, but intelligent control. Machines that could sense and adapt faster than humans could react. In the bitter winter of 1944, Allied air power stretched from Normandy to the Ruhr. Crews began to notice something subtle but decisive. Their engines lasted longer. With the constant speed system maintaining ideal revolutions per minute, stress on pistons and bearings diminished. Maintenance reports recorded a 20% drop in overhauls. Efficiency had become endurance. War, at its core, had turned into mathematics, and Caldwell's equations were winning. Yet triumph never blinded him to cost. He kept a small wooden box on his desk containing fragments of damaged propellers retrieved from crashed aircraft. Each twisted piece was labeled with date, unit, and location. To visitors, it looked macabre. To him, it was accountability. "Every failure is a lesson paid for in blood," he would say quietly. "Our duty is to make sure no lesson repeats." By 1945, as bombers blackened the skies over Germany and the Pacific, the hydromatic system had matured into near perfection. Engineers could feather a failed engine's propeller in less than 2 seconds, saving precious altitude. Test pilots pushed the assemblies to 3,000 revolutions per minute at minus 40 degrees Celsius without a single seizure. The same technology that once barely cleared the Rockies now leapt the Himalayas on supply runs to China. When victory finally came, the headlines celebrated generals and presidents, not the men who made metal think. Caldwell attended the factory's final wartime roll call quietly. He shook hands with supervisors, thanked welders by name, and reminded them that peace was just another kind of engineering challenge. Then he went home and slept for the first time in weeks. The post-war world quickly discovered new uses for his miracle of motion. Commercial aviation boomed. Airliners crossing oceans needed reliability proven in combat. The same constant speed propellers that had fought over Europe now spun above families heading on holidays to Paris and Rome. Airlines printed his name in maintenance manuals, though few passengers ever read it. Every safe landing was another quiet victory. But the jet age loomed, sleek and impatient. By the early 1950s, propellers seemed destined for museums. Caldwell, gray-haired but sharp, welcomed it. He called the jet engine the natural child of everything we learned. When young engineers asked if he felt obsolete, he smiled. "Principles don't die," he replied. "They evolve. The turbine still obeys the same laws of control, the same balance between force and feedback. You'll find my propeller's logic inside every compressor blade." In the decades that followed, aerospace technology vaulted into spaceflight, yet the hydromatic spirit remained. Variable geometry, automatic adjustment, precision under pressure. Each owed a debt to the man who once refused to accept that a propeller could only spin one way. Caldwell never sought riches or fame. He lived modestly in Connecticut, riding a bicycle to work well into his 60s. In his later years, he received letters from pilots who had survived forced landings because their propellers feathered perfectly. Some addressed him simply as the man who saved my crew. He kept every one in a folder marked proof of purpose. When Frank Caldwell passed away in 1974, few newspapers ran obituaries longer than a paragraph. Yet in hangars across the world, mechanics tightening bolts on aging transports still handled parts stamped Caldwell design, patent 1933. His contribution was everywhere, his name almost nowhere, a paradox only true pioneers know. Today, historians count his hydromatic propeller among the most important mechanical inventions of the 20th century, ranking beside the jet turbine and radar. It bridged the gap between human instinct and automatic precision, proving that trust in data could triumph over tradition. It taught engineers that complexity, when mastered, breeds reliability. Standing on a modern airfield, one can still imagine those summer mornings in 1940, the roar of Merlins, the shimmer of aluminum, the sky trembling as Spitfires clawed upward faster than anyone believed possible. Those climbs were not just ascents through air, they were ascents through doubt. Frank Caldwell's impossible idea had turned skepticism into lift. It had given machines the ability to adapt, pilots the confidence to fight, and nations the time to breathe. And though the age of propellers has faded into the whisper of museum halls, their spin remains a heartbeat inside every engine that learned to think for itself. If you love true stories of forgotten heroes, groundbreaking innovations, and moments that changed history, this video is for you. Anchor subscribe now for more powerful hidden stories from World War II and Cold War aviation. Speech balloon comment below and tell me where you're watching from. I read every single one. Thumbs up like this video to help more history lovers discover it. Military Metal joined the mission to keep these stories alive, because history's greatest revolutions often start with one person who refused to say, "That's just how it's done."